In a small alien village deep inside a thick green forest lived a tiny alien girl named Lyra. She was no taller than a human hand, with bright purple skin, glowing blue eyes, and 2 small antennae on her head. The people of her village were all small like her. They lived hidden under tree roots and inside hollow logs, away from the eyes of the outside world. Since Lyra was a child, she had heard terrifying stories from the elders. "Humans are giants," the elders would say. "They stomp through the forest, crushing everything. If a human finds you, it will eat you in one bite." These stories scared Lyra deeply. She would shiver at night, imagining a giant human hand grabbing her and swallowing her whole. The thought of it made her never want to leave the village. But Lyra was also curious. Are humans really that scary? She often asked herself. Has anyone actually seen one? One morning, the village woke up to a loud, deep sound. It was like thunder, but the sky was clear. The ground shook slightly, and the trees rustled as if something heavy had walked nearby. The elder shouted, "A human has landed. A giant walks in our forest." Fear spread like fire. Mothers pulled their children close. Hunters sharpened their tiny spears. No one was allowed to leave the village, but Lyra couldn't stop thinking about the human. She stood at the edge of the village, staring into the dark forest. She imagined the human tall as a mountain, with eyes like fire, and teeth sharp enough to bite through stone. Still, her curiosity was stronger than her fear. "I want to see it with my own eyes," Lyra whispered. That night, when everyone was asleep, Lyra grabbed her little satchel and snuck out of the village. The forest was dark and cold, but the moonlight helped her see. She walked carefully, climbing over leaves bigger than herself, jumping over small pebbles that felt like boulders. As she walked deeper, she heard something. Thump thump dotty. Footsteps. The ground shook a little with each step. Lyra's heart raced. She hid behind a mushroom and peeked. There, between the trees, stood the human. He was huge, just as the stories described. His legs were like tree trunks, and his arms looked strong enough to break a whole tree in half. He wore clothes that were torn and dusty, and carried a big bag on his back. His face looked rough, with a short beard and tired eyes. But something was different. The human didn't look like a monster. His eyes weren't fiery, and he didn't have sharp teeth. Instead, he looked sad. He sat down on a fallen log, sighed, and took out a piece of bread from his bag. He broke a piece and ate slowly. Lyra watched, surprised. He eats bread? Not little aliens? She thought. She decided to get a bit closer, stepping carefully. But as she climbed over a twig, she slipped and fell, landing on a crunchy leaf. Crack! The sound echoed. The human's head turned quickly. His eyes scanned the area. He stood up, towering over the ground, and slowly walked toward the sound. Lyra froze. "Oh no, he heard me. He's coming." She tried to run, but her leg was stuck under a small branch. She pulled and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. The footsteps got louder. Thump thump. Lyra single quotes. Heart pounded. She could hear the human breathing. The shadow of his body covered her. Then, a huge hand reached down. Lyra screamed, closing her eyes tight. She expected to be grabbed roughly, crushed, or eaten right there. But instead, the hand gently lifted the branch off her leg. She opened her eyes slowly. The human was kneeling, his face close but calm. His eyes looked curious, not angry. "Hey there, little one," he said softly. His voice was deep, but gentle. Lyra couldn't understand his words, but she felt no pain. The human carefully picked her up, holding her in his palm. She trembled, thinking, "This is it. He's going to eat me now." But the human only smiled a little and looked at her closely, as if she was a tiny animal he had never seen before. "You're amazing," he whispered. Lyra didn't know what to do. She was scared, but also amazed. The human wasn't biting her or hurting her. He was just watching her. Then he gently placed her in the pocket of his jacket, carefully so she wouldn't fall. "You'll be safer here," he said. Lyra didn't understand, but she felt the warmth of the pocket. She thought, is this how he keeps his food, or does he want to protect me? Her mind was full of fear and questions. She couldn't know that this was only the beginning of an unexpected journey. And far away, back in the village, no one knew that Lyra was now in the hands of the very giant they feared most. Lyra lay still inside the human's jacket pocket. The cloth was soft, warmer than anything she had felt before. She was shaking, her tiny hands clutching the edge of the pocket. "Why didn't he eat me?" she whispered to herself. "Maybe he wants to fatten me up. Make me his meal later." She imagined herself on a giant's plate, surrounded by fruits and bread. The thought made her shiver more, but the human kept walking, his steps heavy but steady. His name was Jake, though Lyra didn't know that yet. Jake didn't even realize the little creature was still so scared. To him, she was like a lost kitten, small, fragile, and alone. After a long walk, Jake stopped. He reached a broken shuttle pod, half buried under dirt and vines. It looked like he had been living there, making it his temporary shelter. The human gently pulled Lyra from his pocket and placed her on a soft piece of cloth inside the shelter. "Don't be afraid, little one," Jake said softly. Lyra couldn't understand his words, but his voice didn't sound angry or cruel. It sounded tired. She stared at him, confused. He tore a piece of bread and placed it next to her. For her, it was like a mountain of food. "Eat if you're hungry," Jake said. Lyra didn't move. She was too scared it might be a trap. Maybe the bread was poisoned, but her stomach growled loudly. She hadn't eaten since morning. Carefully, she took a small crumb and tasted it. It was soft and delicious. Her hunger won the battle. She quickly grabbed more crumbs, stuffing them into her mouth. Jake chuckled. "So you do eat bread," he said. Lyra stopped, cheeks full, and looked up at him. "He's watching me. Maybe he likes to watch his food eat before he eats it too." She thought. After eating, Lyra grew sleepy, but she didn't want to close her eyes. She feared that if she slept, the human would eat her in one bite. But then, Jake did something strange. He took a piece of clean cloth, folded it, and placed it beside her. "For you." "A bed," he smiled. Lyra blinked. "A bed?" No monster would make a bed for its meal. She sat on the cloth, touching it gently. It was soft and cozy. Jake leaned back inside. "I'm so alone here," he muttered to himself. "You're the first living thing I've seen that isn't trying to kill me." Lyra tilted her head. She couldn't understand his language, but she could feel the sadness in his voice. She wasn't sure why, but a part of her heart softened. Why is a giant human sad? Don't monsters enjoy being feared? She wondered. Night fell. The forest outside was full of strange sounds. Lyra heard distant roars and rustles. She knew other creatures lived out there, some even bigger than her. Some were dangerous even to her people. Jake lit a small fire in his shelter. The warmth of the flame spread, chasing away the cold. Lyra's body relaxed. She watched the human staring into the fire, his eyes full of memories and pain. She whispered softly, Maybe he's not going to eat me after all." But then a dark thought crossed her mind. What if he waits for me to grow bigger before eating me? She shook her head, confused and scared. She didn't know what to think anymore. Suddenly, a loud roar echoed from the forest. A beast, big and wild, howled in the distance. Jake stood up and grabbed a sharp stick. He looked around, alert. Lyra crawled deeper into the cloth bed, shaking. Jake noticed her fear. He picked up a small cap from his bag, carefully placed it over her like a tent, and whispered, "Stay hidden. I'll keep watch." Lyra peeked from under the cap. The human was standing guard, protecting her. Not from himself, but from the dangers outside. Why would he protect me? She thought. Why would a giant guard something so small? She watched him until her eyes grew heavy. Slowly, her fear started to fade, just a little. She whispered before sleep took her. Maybe, just maybe, he's not a monster. Outside, the forest was still dangerous, but inside the broken shuttle, a tiny alien girl slept safely guarded by the very creature she had feared all her life. But little did Lyra know, this was only the beginning. The forest was watching. Her people would soon come looking. And not everyone would believe that a human could be kind. When morning light entered the broken shuttle, Lyra slowly opened her eyes. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She felt warmth, safety, and the soft cloth under her body. But then she remembered the human. She jumped up, looking around in panic. The giant could be near. She peeked from under the small cap the human had placed over her like a tent. There he was sitting by the fire, staring at a small device in his hand. His eyes looked tired, his face calm but sad. Jake, the human, hadn't slept the whole night. He had stayed awake, keeping watch. The sounds of beasts in the forest had kept him alert, but he didn't let them come near. Lyra stared, confused. Why did he guard me? Why did he protect me instead of eating me? She whispered to herself. Suddenly, Jake noticed her tiny face. Peeking out, he smiled softly and said, "Good morning, little one. Still scared of me?" Lyra didn't understand his words, but his tone was gentle. She expected loud, monstrous roars, but his voice was deep yet kind. Jake picked up a metal cap, scooped some water from a bottle, and carefully placed it next to her. He then broke a small piece of fruit and set it down. "Here, breakfast." He chuckled. Lyra's stomach growled. She was still hungry, but she hesitated. She looked at the water, then at Jake. If he wanted to harm me, he had all night to do it, she thought. Slowly she stepped forward, took a sip of water, and then ate a small piece of the fruit. It was sweet and juicy, better than anything she had ever tasted. Jake watched her, fascinated. "You're amazing. So tiny yet so brave," he whispered. He grabbed a small stick and started drawing shapes on the dirt floor. First, he drew a big figure himself. Then a small circle. Lyra. He pointed to himself and said, "Jake." Then he pointed to her and waited. Lyra stared, confused at first, but then understood he was asking for her name. She placed her tiny hand on her chest and said softly, "Lyra." Jake smiled wide. Lyra, beautiful name. Though she didn't understand his words, his smile made her feel less afraid. Jake then drew more things: trees, animals, the sun, and even the moon. He made noises imitating beasts, showing that they were dangerous. Lyra giggled at his funny sounds. For the first time she laughed. And for the first time, Jake heard her tiny laughter. It was like a small bell ringing. "You laugh like wind chimes," Jake smiled. Lyra watched him closely now. She noticed the scratches on his arms, the torn clothes, the bruises. He's hurt. He must have been fighting to survive, she thought. She pointed at his wounds and made a concerned face. Jake chuckled and shook his head. "I'm okay." "You're worried about me?" Lyra didn't understand, but her worried expression made Jake's heart warm. No one had cared for him in a long time, not even humans. He was stranded, alone on this alien planet. She was the first creature that made him feel seen. To thank her, Jake took a small shiny stone from his bag and placed it before her. It glittered like a star. Lyra's eyes widened. "A gift for me?" she whispered. She touched the stone, feeling its smooth surface. No one had ever given her a gift before. In her village, they had warned her humans were evil, greedy, and violent. But this human had given her food, water, a bed, protection, and now a gift. Maybe my people were wrong. Lyra thought. Jake then sat back and watched the forest from the broken window. He sighed deeply, looking at the sky. I wish someone could find me, or take me home, he said. Lyra watched him, feeling a strange connection to the giant. She realized he was lonely, just like her. For the first time, Lyra stood up proudly and pointed to herself. Lyra, she said loudly. Jake looked back, surprised. He smiled, understanding what she meant. I know, Lyra. I'm Jake. They both sat quietly, staring at each other. Two beings from two different worlds. Yet, something connected them, not words. Not size, but a gentle understanding that neither was truly a monster. Outside, the forest watched silently. But neither Jake nor Lyra knew that soon danger was coming. Not from the beasts, but from her own people, who would never believe that a human could be gentle. Days passed inside the broken shuttle, and each day, Lyra watched the human with growing curiosity. She stayed cautious, but her fear was not as sharp anymore. The human Jake had not harmed her. Instead, he had cared for her, shared his food, and even built her a tiny corner inside the shelter with cloth walls and a bed made of soft cotton. Jake, on the other hand, still didn't know much about the little alien girl. He called her Lyra in his deep voice, and though she didn't speak his language, her eyes followed his every move. One afternoon, Jake sat near the fire, repairing a broken piece of metal with his tools. He was humming a soft tune, something from Earth, a song about stars. Lyra sat nearby, holding the shiny stone Jake had gifted her. She liked the way it caught the light. Suddenly, Jake drew something in the dirt. He drew a circle and pointed to himself. Jake, human. Then he pointed to Lyra, raising his eyebrows. Lyra blinked, then understood. She pointed to herself and said, Mini Farah. Jake tilted his head. Mini Farah? She nodded. Mini Farah. My kind, Jake smiled. He repeated slowly, Mini Farah. Lyra clapped. She was excited that he understood. Then, using her tiny fingers, she drew a stick figure of herself beside a mushroom and a tree, showing that her people lived small, hidden under nature. Jake watched, impressed. He drew the earth with a small stick man on it, then a circle representing his crashed shuttle. He mimed crashing, with sound effects. Lyra laughed at his silly acting but realized what he meant. His ship crashed. He's stranded here. She whispered. Then Lyra drew other big circles, representing beasts in the forest, and made growling sounds. Jake laughed. Yeah, I've seen those beasts. Suddenly, Lyra stood up and began miming walking, then stopping, then pointing to Jake and herself, then to the trees. She was trying to say, let me guide you to safety. Jake watched, trying to understand. He smiled but shook his head. You want to help me? He asked, though she didn't understand. Still, her actions were clear. She wanted to show him a way out. Jake's eyes softened. No human had cared about him since he crashed. And now, this tiny alien girl, once scared of him, wanted to guide him. Jake looked at her seriously and said, Thank you, Lyra. Though she didn't catch his words, his gentle tone told her he understood. Then Jake stood up, stretched, and pretended to march like a soldier, playfully making stomping sounds. Lyra giggled. She tried to mimic his march, but her legs were too tiny, and she stumbled, falling onto the soft cloth. Jake laughed loudly, a sound that echoed warmly in the shelter. For the first time since he landed on this planet, he didn't feel alone. They spent the afternoon drawing, miming, and teaching each other simple gestures. Lyra pointed to the sky and said, Sun. Jake repeated, Sun. Then he pointed to himself again, Jake. And Lyra proudly pointed, Lyra. Jake nodded. Lyra, my friend. Though the word friend was unknown to her, the way he smiled when he said it made her tiny heart warm. Night fell again, but the fear was gone. Lyra curled up in her little bed while Jake sat by the fire, smiling to himself. A tiny alien friend, what are the odds? Jake whispered. Lyra, half asleep, whispered to herself. Maybe humans aren't all bad. Maybe I was wrong. But deep in the forest, watchful eyes glowed in the dark. Someone was watching the shelter. Someone small and fast. One of Lyra's kind. The spy ran back to the village to deliver the news. Lyra is alive. But she's with the human. The village elders would not like this. To them, a human was still a giant monster. And soon, they would come to rescue Lyra by force if necessary. And so, while Lyra and Jake laughed together under the soft light of the fire, neither of them knew that a storm was coming. The sun was still low in the sky when Lyra heard a strange sound from the forest, soft, fast footsteps and the faint rustle of leaves. She stood on her little cloth bed, her antennae twitching. Something was coming. Suddenly, she saw them, dozens of Minifara, her own people, creeping silently between the trees. Their tiny bodies blended with the forest, carrying sharp spears made from thorns, and wearing leaves as armor. At their front stood Elder Varco, the oldest and sternest of the village. His eyes were sharp, his face carved with suspicion and anger. They had come to rescue Lyra, but to them, this was a mission of war. They believed the human was holding her captive, maybe even torturing her. Lyra's heart raced. She wanted to warn Jake, but how? He was sitting by the fire, humming, sharpening a stick, unaware of the approaching danger. Suddenly, Varco raised his hand and shouted, "Attack the giant! Save the girl!" Dozens of Minifara warriors charged forward, their tiny war cries piercing. They ran fast, swarming over Jake's legs, arms, and clothes, stabbing with their small but sharp weapons. Jake cried out, shocked and confused. What the? He stood up quickly, shaking his limbs to throw them off, but he didn't strike back. He didn't want to hurt them. He saw their tiny faces filled with rage and fear. Lyra screamed from her cloth bed, "No, stop, stop!" But her voice was too small. No one listened. Jake saw her jumping up and down, shouting. His heart ached. He didn't want to fight them, but the stings from their weapons hurt. One of the warriors tried to grab Lyra, pulling her away from her bed. She struggled, yelling, "Let me go, he didn't hurt me." The warrior ignored her, carrying her toward Varco. Varco raised his voice, "We have saved you, child. The human shall pay for this." Lyra shouted, "No, you're wrong. He saved me." Varco paused, confused. Jake, breathing heavily, stood still, arms raised in surrender. "He didn't want to fight, not after everything. Please." "I'm not your enemy," Jake said softly, though the Minifara couldn't understand him. Lyra escaped the warrior's grip, running back to Jake. She stood between the angry villagers and the giant human, her arms stretched wide. "Stop! He didn't harm me. He gave me food, water, and shelter. He protected me from the beasts." The warriors froze. No one expected Lyra to defend the human. Varco stepped forward, eyes narrowed. "You are brainwashed, child. He has tricked you." "No," Lyra screamed. "He is not like the stories. He is gentle. He is kind." Varco looked at Jake. The human's body had small bleeding cuts from their tiny spears, but he stood still, not attacking, not angry. "If he was a monster," Lyra cried, "wouldn't I be dead already?" The warriors murmured among themselves. Varco frowned. He had lived his life believing that humans were evil, but this human was peaceful. Jake slowly knelt, lowering himself to their level. He gently placed his hand on the ground, palm open, showing he meant no harm. Lyra walked to his hand and stood proudly. "He is my friend," she said loudly. "I trust him." Varco watched, troubled. He looked at his warriors, then at Jake, then at Lyra. "Perhaps we were wrong," Varco admitted softly. The warriors lowered their spears. There was silence. Only the wind whispered through the trees. Jake smiled, not knowing their words but feeling the shift in the air. He looked at Lyra and whispered, "Thank you, little one." Lyra smiled back, "You're welcome, my gentle giant." That day, the Minifara saw something they never imagined, a human not as a monster, but as a protector, as a friend. But trust was fragile. Varco had doubts, and some villagers still watched Jake with fear in their eyes. Lyra knew this was only the beginning. She had to prove that humans and Minifara could understand each other. And maybe, just maybe, she and Jake could change their two worlds forever. The air around the broken shuttle was heavy with silence. The Minifara warriors stood still, their tiny hands gripping their spears tightly. The human Jake was kneeling, his large hands resting open on the ground, showing he meant no harm. But deep in the eyes of Elder Varco, the suspicion had not gone. His voice was cold when he said, "We cannot trust a human. It could all be a trick. Giants always deceive. He will crush us when we lower our guard." The warriors nodded in agreement. The stories had shaped their minds for generations, stories of humans as destroyers, devourers, merciless creatures. Lyra felt the tension. She looked at Jake's face. He didn't understand their words, but he understood the fear in their eyes. His face was calm but sad. Lyra's tiny fists tightened. She knew she couldn't stay silent. If she didn't speak now, everything Jake had done for her would mean nothing. She stepped forward, standing between Jake and her people. Her voice was small but firm. "No, you are all wrong. He is not a monster." The warriors looked at her, surprised. "He gave me food when I was hungry. He gave me water when I was thirsty. He made me a bed when I was cold. And when the beasts roared in the night, he stayed awake to guard me." Varco stepped forward. "Child, you are blinded. He has bewitched you with kindness, but it is fake." "No!" Lyra shouted. Her voice shook, but she stood tall. "I watched him. I watched his sadness. He is alone here. He has no family, no friends. He is lost, just like I was." Varco's eyes narrowed. Even if that is true, what if he calls others? What if more giants come? Will they be kind too? Or will they bring fire and death? Lyra turned to Jake. She stared at his tired eyes, his bruised skin, and his broken shelter. She remembered his gentle laughter, his careful hands, his patience. She climbed onto his hand, standing proudly on his open palm. "I will take that chance," she declared, "because I have seen his heart, and it is not cruel." Jake watched her, feeling her confidence, though he didn't know her words. He smiled softly. Varco watched this scene, his mind in conflict. All his life he had believed in fear, in warnings, in staying hidden. But now, a young girl stood tall on the palm of the very being they feared. And she wasn't afraid. The warriors whispered among themselves. Some of their stern faces softened. They looked at Jake and then at Lyra. One warrior stepped forward. Elder Varco. The human could have crushed her easily. But he didn't. That means something. Varco's mouth tightened. His pride told him to reject this, but his wisdom whispered otherwise. At last he said, "If this human wishes peace, then let him prove it." Jake noticed the slight change in the villager's tone. He looked at Lyra questioningly. Lyra pointed to herself, and Jake then gestured to the village direction. She was asking, "Can he come to the village?" Varco hesitated, but then nodded slowly. "If the human means no harm, he may come." Jake didn't understand, but Lyra smiled and clapped her hands. She hugged his thumb tightly, making Jake chuckle. "I think that's a yes," Jake whispered. For the first time, the walls between giant and tiny, between human and Minifara, began to lower. But Lyra knew this was just the start. Many still watched Jake with eyes of doubt. He would have to prove himself, not just to Varco, but to all the Minifara. Still, She stood proud. She had made her stand. She had spoken the truth. As the sun rose higher, the unlikely pair, one giant, one tiny, prepared to walk together toward a village that had never seen a human up close. Their journey was not just of steps, but of changing hearts. And in the trees, the wind carried a message. The girl stood for the giant, and now the world may change. The path to the Minifara village was not made for giants. The trees stood close together, the roots high and twisted, the spaces small and hidden. But still, Jake walked slowly, his careful steps avoiding the paths where the Minifara traveled. On his shoulder rode Lyra, guiding him with tiny gestures. She pointed where to step, where to duck, and when to stop. The warriors marched ahead and behind, still holding their spears, but their grip wasn't as tight as before. Lyra watched the villagers closely. She could feel their fear, their doubt. They didn't trust Jake yet, and perhaps some never would. But she was determined to change that. When they finally reached the village, it was like entering another world. Small huts made from leaves, sticks, and mushrooms covered the forest floor. Bridges of vines connected branches high above. Minifara of all ages peeked from their homes, gasping at the sight of the giant human. Children hid behind their mothers. Elders frowned and whispered, "Is that the monster? Why is the girl with him? He'll crush us all." But Jake simply stood still, not moving too quickly. He crouched, placing his large hands on his knees, observing the tiny world around him with wonder. "Wow," he whispered. "A whole tiny city." Lyra stood tall on his shoulder and called out, "Do not be afraid. He is not here to harm anyone." No one replied. Fear was stronger than her words. Then an old woman, her back bent, stepped forward. "If he is not a monster, then let him prove it," she said. Lyra thought for a moment. Then she had an idea. She whispered instructions to Jake, pointing to the village center. He didn't understand every word, but her gestures made sense. Jake stepped forward, pulled off his backpack, and carefully opened a small pocket. From it, he took out tiny tools, seeds, and shiny stones. He sat down cross-legged and placed the items on the ground. Lyra stood beside them and declared, "These are gifts. Tools to help you build, seeds to grow new food, and stones for light and beauty." The villagers stared, whispering. One by one, the braver ones came closer, inspecting the strange but fascinating items. They had never seen tools so small yet so useful: hooks, threads, even glass that could focus sunlight. Children's eyes shone with wonder. Then Jake, smiling, picked up a broken village basket and began fixing it with one of his tools. His fingers were big, but his movements were gentle. When he finished, the basket was stronger and looked new. Gasps filled the air. Some villagers clapped. The children giggled, no longer afraid. Lyra shouted proudly, "See? He helps, he builds, he protects." Even Elder Varco watched silently, his doubts slowly melting. Another moment of silence passed, then an elder stepped forward and placed a tiny flower on Jake's shoe. It was a sign of welcome. Lyra's heart soared. She looked up at Jake and said, "You've done it. They are starting to believe." Jake didn't understand the words but saw the smiles and knew. "Thank you, Lyra," he whispered. "You did this." That evening, the villagers gathered. In the center, they shared stories, songs, and food, sitting together with the giant who was no longer a stranger. Jake listened to their music, watched their dances, and even tried to copy a few moves, making the children laugh when he stumbled. For the first time in Minifara history, a human and Minifara shared peace. Lyra sat on Jake's shoulder, watching the stars above. She smiled softly. "Maybe, just maybe, the world is bigger than fear. Maybe giants and the small can be friends." Jake looked at the stars too, whispering, "I'm not alone anymore." The forest was no longer just a place of fear. It had become a home of new beginnings. where the giant and the tiny stood together, not as enemies, but as friends. And in the heart of that friendship was one tiny girl, brave enough to believe that even the biggest monster could have a kind heart.